What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Creative Rise Podcast. So glad you are here today with us, episode 176. These episodes are stacking.
We're getting close to 200.
I know, we're coming up on 200
I feel like we gotta do some like
episodes.
big giveaway on 200 or something like that. That'd be exciting.
Yeah, I think we should. We probably should have done one on like 175. I feel like 175 is a good, like
No,
175 to maybe we'll start doing them every 25 episodes. We'll start doing some type of giveaway.
Yeah.
But so glad you're here today. We are talking about a little bit of a touchy subject, a subject that can make or quite literally break your business. And we're going to talk about how it can do both of those later on the show today and how you can really handle that well. We're talking about situations today that you might get yourself into with clients where it's a little bit touchy, it's a little bit awkward. Maybe they're asking for something you don't want to do. Maybe they've done something that they weren't supposed to do.
Yeah.
You know, the relationship is potentially fractured or about to be fractured. What do you do with that, right? We've both been in those situations. We've had lots of people in our community be in those situations. And we're going to talk to you today about 4 things that you can do. I think it's 4. We wrote 4. We wrote 5. 5 things that you can do that we do that we believe help us actually navigate these well. So before we jump into that, though, exciting little update on Creative Rise.
Yeah.
By the time this comes out, the day this comes out, Wednesday, May 8th, this episode's coming out. If you're listening to that and you are a Creative Rise grad, you got to join us tonight for our Clear and Committed workshop. We are doing a new workshop inside of the Creative Rise community, teaching you how to get more clear on what 2024 is going to look like for you and what you need to do, and then getting committed to that, getting committed to the things you need to commit to in order to create whatever you are trying to get clear on, aka your vision for 2024. So we're really excited. If you feel like you need some new goal setting, feel like you need a new business plan, and more importantly, you need other people to see it, beat it up with you, acknowledge it, and then watch you commit to what you're going to commit to so you actually push for it this year, you got to be on tonight's workshop. So if you want to do that, all you got to do is DM us, either Christy and I or at Creative Rise on Instagram. This is for grads only, mastermind grads only. This is a graduate community, but I know there's a lot of grads that listen to the podcast. So just throwing it out there. Can't wait to see you guys tonight. But let's jump back into it.
Let's do it. So again, you guys, this whole conversation is how to have conflict conversations in a healthy way. And I'm pretty sure nobody's born doing conflict perfectly. Like, I feel like everybody comes from family of origin or whatever, where you've got conflict styles, conflict resolution. And it's something that I feel like I know I've had to grow in a ton because I've got a natural response to conflict. I know you've also have natural responses to conflict that we obviously deal with in our marriage, but it's so good. And
in our businesses.
And in our businesses. But one of the things, the best thing you can do for your business, relationships, everything is figure out how to do conflict and do it well. And so that is what this conversation is all about. So we've got a couple stories that we want to give.
A couple quick examples. So
quick examples.
Right off the top of your head, this might resonate with you. Maybe you had a client asking for outrageous revisions, right? Like, hey, I need you to revise this, this, and this. Or let's say you had 3 revisions in the contract and they're on like revision 6 and they're still not holding back. They're just letting you have everything. And maybe you're revising things you already revised, right? Yeah. It's just like, this is so annoying. I want to just throw my computer at this client. Like, what do you do?
Yeah.
Right? Or maybe they're actually breaking something in the contract, right?
Yeah.
Like,
they want out of the contract.
These are things that if you have been in business for one wedding season or a full year of brand work, wherever you are, you don't have to be in business very long to start coming up against these situations, right?
Yeah, exactly. So we're going to touch on a couple of quick examples and then we're going to give you our 5 points. But a personal example for myself, and this is something, again, I had to deal with probably now maybe 3 years ago. I had a wedding client who I delivered all the images and she was super unhappy with the way that they were edited. So kind of a little bit of backstory. They had spent a ton of money on this big extravagant wedding. She was super stressed out the day of. I felt so bad for her. I was like, the girl's literally shaking. And anyways, had this whole like wedding and it was awesome. And yet I think that it was a little bit the feeling of stress on over budget of what the wedding was supposed to be versus what it ended up being. And so she sent me this long, pretty scathing email after I delivered all the images, basically saying that I was like withholding images from her, that this certain color wasn't being represented well in the edits, and that she was so unhappy and she was so disappointed and all this kind of stuff. Now, my immediate gut reaction is to be super defensive. Like, just full transparency, that is my immediate gut reaction. I just go, oh my gosh, like I get super defensive. I get really, because I'm like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? Like I don't have unhappy clients that often. What am I going to do? So anyways, I could have just responded back and fired back a mean email being like, well, in the contract, it says this about my editing and I get choice over this and I get to choose how many images I give you and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But instead, I was like, okay, no. Let me like talk to somebody. Let me cool down just for a second. But then let me send a quick email back asking to jump on the phone. And so we jumped on the phone and it was awesome because I came in being like, you know what? I want this to be right for you. Like, I want you to have the best experience possible. And I'm so sorry that you feel like you didn't get the best experience. I want to make sure that's righted. And so what can we do and how can we figure this out to make this a win for you? Because I do really care about your experience. She immediately broke down in tears, talked about how she felt like she went way over budget, that they overspent, that she actually does really love the photos, but she just wants a couple things tweaked. And all of a sudden, what went from a super angry bride went to someone who felt really taken care of. I ended up fully re-editing the entire set for her, sent it off. She like literally had the best experience possible and ended up saying, hey, this was a really, really great experience. And I'm so sorry that I sent you that email that way. It was like a total 180. Now, I'm not saying that's how you treat every experience, right?
Yeah,
Do you want to
we'll
give
talk
another
about that.
example?
Yeah, I could give so many examples. I'll give you an example more about myself in a second, but we've had lots of examples. Even these are two examples, even in the past like 2 weeks from our Creative Rise grad community. And the first one is a grad who was working with a brand who sells products, and so the person who sells the products, they don't own the actual company that makes the products; they just sell them. They hired somebody in our community to actually produce images for you, and it all went really well. But all of a sudden, the person in our community started seeing the actual product manufacturers using the images, and they're like, "Wait a second, that's not who I sold those images to. I sold them to like a store, a salesman, that sells that manufacturer's products. Now the manufacturer's using the products, like." That's a breach of contract. Like, I didn't sell the images to them. I sold them to you. That's a licensing issue, right? So that's a problem right there. We also had another one, even just recently, where a friend of ours, a grad, in our community, shot a wedding, and photos came back, and she thought they were amazing. And all of a sudden, some of the family members in the family of the bride were like, "Hey, I don't like how I necessarily look in this. Can we get them all re-edited?"
Like photoshopped.
Like photoshopped.
yeah.
Like, can you Photoshop my body in the entire wedding gallery? Which is obviously not something that in most wedding photographers is in their service,
Scope of
outline, their scope of work.
Yeah.
And so here's, this Creative Rise grad going, well, what do I do? Like, that would be a couple hundred images.
Yeah.
Like, that's a
Probably
lot
way
of
more
images.
than that.
That's a
Probably way
lot
more
of
than that.
images I would have to Photoshop. Like,
Yeah.
oh my goodness, right? What do I do? But it was also very important to the person that reached out, because they're like, this is
Yeah.
the wedding photos that I want to put on a wall and print. Like, I don't like these. Fix my body, right? Like, these are tough situations. One is this a breach of contract? They're giving the images to a manufacturer that I didn't sell them to. What do I do about that? And then this wedding example, this is a super important day for somebody, but that would also be like days and days and days of additional work trying to Photoshop, and even for this person in particular, learn how to Photoshop really well and do this, then Photoshop hundreds of images of somebody in the family of their wedding. It's like, it's crazy, right? So
Yeah.
what do you do? Well, we have 5 tips for you. 5 things that you should think about and you should position yourself to do when you are dealing with conflict with clients. Client conflict needs to be dealt with really well, as Chrissy
Yeah.
said earlier. So the first one, number one, how to deal with a client when you have conflict is find out the actual problem. Number one is find the actual problem. It's not always about what it's about. This is great marriage
That's
advice.
like my favorite phrase.
Great
ever.
marriage advice. This is great business advice. This is great client relationship with advice. It's not always about what it's about. So you've got to actually try and peel back the layers of, why are they requesting this? Why are they saying this? What's actually potentially going on behind what's actually going on, right?
Yeah.
And so I've got an example of this, a story of my own. We had a big rebrand, built a website, helped with a ton of social strategy, visual rebrand, narrative rebrand. Like, we overhauled an entire business back in, I think, 2018 or 2019. And no, sorry, it was end of 2019, and then into the first maybe a month and a half of COVID in 2020. And everything went really well, delivered on everything. And all of a sudden, I got this really angry text and email from this client that I've been working with. And I thought we had a great relationship. And I went, man, what's going on? They were asking for all this money back. They're like, you guys didn't deliver on this or deliver on that. And I'm going, wait a second, we completely delivered on that, you know? And they're like, well, it's not working and this and that. And my immediate response was to go, well, what the heck? Like, I don't want to refund people. I feel like we did everything, and get defensive. As you said, your natural response is, most people's natural response is to get defensive.
Yeah.
But I did a couple of these steps that we're going to talk about later on in the show here. But the first thing that I did was I tried to figure out what was actually going on. So when she was like, hey, you didn't do this, and I'm going, we clearly did that. I'm going, there's something missing here. She's saying we didn't do something. I know we did something. So we got on a phone call. And I said, what's really going on here? Like, tell me this. How didn't we do this? And I was inquiring about it. Long story short, everything ended up going well. I figured out it was not about what it was about. It was actually about the fact that the governments were putting such restrictions on this woman's business through COVID, in the beginning stages of COVID. And due to the nature of her business, she quite literally couldn't run. And so she was losing money every single day. And so she was calling all her shots, trying to figure out how to keep her business alive, which, you know, ethical or non-ethical, whatever we did, I had empathy for. And I went, this really sucks. This isn't actually about anything what we did. I'm just a vendor of yours that has recently worked with you. You've paid, and you're trying to get as much money back in your bank account as possible. So I figured that out, and then I was able to make decisions from there. I did not grant her wish the way that she maybe wanted it to be granted, but the relationship stayed intact because of the way I handled it, because I figured out what it was actually about, and then I approached that with empathy.
And the best way to figure out what it's really about, because you might be wondering, okay, I know it's not what it's about, but how do you actually figure that out? How do you just not walk up to someone and go, what's this really about? You know, I think the best way, and you kind of talked about it, is show empathy.
Yeah.
Try to put yourself in their shoes and then talk about, hey, I know this must be really frustrating. I don't want you to feel this way. How can we make things right? That's a great way to figure out, hey, what is this really about? And you'll oftentimes come to that. So number one, find out what the real problem is. It's not about what it's about, and don't get defensive, right? It probably has nothing to do with you personally. It probably just either has to do with a miscommunication or something that wasn't delivered upon, or there's just something that needs to be figured out business-wise. Try not to take it personally.
And this goes back, even one more thing, even back to the example of one of our grads, you know, with that situation where somebody wanted all of the photos of them from the entire wedding gallery photoshopped to change their body.
Yes.
Like, you know, that request seems at point blank like it's just about getting images touched up. But if you actually are empathetic and you approach that, it's like, oh, there's actually a much deeper seated issue inside of this.
There's an insecurity
and so
you're dealing with.
There's an insecurity you're dealing with, and you can approach that. She actually did a great job. She approached it with empathy.
Yeah.
And then she figured out a win-win.
Yeah.
Because she really figured out what it was about. And really what it was about was this woman just wanted to have a few really good photos that she actually loved to print and put in her home.
Exactly.
So instead of editing the whole gallery, because she figured out what it was actually about, she said, hey, if you want to select some of the ones that you really, really do want to print, I will do my best to Photoshop some of those for you. So instead of her having to Photoshop like a couple hundred images, she went down to like 4 or 5 and did a really good job.
Yep.
You know, the client ended up being really happy, and it created a win-win because of the empathy and because she figured out it's not always about what it's about. Let me go a little bit deeper here.
Yeah.
So that's great.
Tip number 2 is to not wait to respond. You guys, you lose weight in your response when you wait for forever. Like, for instance, if you were to send, you know, a text to somebody that was conflict, or email, or you try to call them, you leave a voicemail, and you don't hear back from them within 24 hours, you're like, oh, they're ignoring me. Oh, they're waiting. And then all of a sudden the resentment of the client who paid you money, who hired you for a service, doesn't feel like they're getting a response back fast enough. That's going to be like a lack of customer service, which is going to light the fuel of the fire under them. And it'll also make you look insecure. It'll also make you look like you don't necessarily maybe know what you're doing, where in fact you maybe do. You're just maybe waiting to respond, trying to figure out exactly what you're going to say, but it loses weight. Your response really loses weight and authority if you wait a long time to respond. So make sure that if you do receive a text like that, or you do receive an email or a call from an unhappy client, make sure you're dealing with it within a reasonable amount of time. In my opinion, you should be getting back to that person, even if it's like a, hey, I would love to talk more about this. Can we jump on a call? Or, hey, I just saw this. I don't have time to respond right now, but I want to let you know I will be getting back to you in 24 hours or 36 hours or whatever it is. Even if it's just a quick touch, that itself gives so much ease to a client to know that they are actually a priority. So make sure you don't wait.
And it's a sign of respect to yourself,
yes.
right? So absolutely. So that's number 2. Number 3, The third thing you need to do when you are in a conflict situation with a client is you need to make sure you're talking in straight lines. You're not talking in circles. One of the biggest potential downfalls to you getting the solution you want when you are in conflict with a client is if you confuse things, if you make things really unclear. That is going to only add to their frustration. That's going to add to their, just the frustration of the situation they're in and how they want it to be resolved. So people who handle conflict really well are clear, concise, they speak in straight lines. So here's an example of that. Speaking in a straight line, let's say the example is going back to the wedding one where somebody wants, to have photos altered, photoshopped, and they want a mass amount of them. If your response is going to basically be, no, I'm not going to do that, but I can do a select few, you could say, hey, yeah, so I know you want this. I don't really want to be able to have to go back and do the whole wedding. You don't even understand how much work that would take me. It would take me days and hours, and that's too much time. I've got a wedding coming up this weekend. I don't have time to do that. I don't even know how to really do that. I have to figure it out. I don't have time to go YouTube this, and I don't know. Like, that's talking in circles versus saying, hey, I understand your request. I do not have time to do all that, nor was it in the service agreement. However, here's my request for you. What are 3 to 5 photos that you would really want to put on your wall that if I can find the time in the next 48 hours, me photoshopping those would make you very, very happy, would fulfill your request? What would those be? That is a straight line. I'm saying things very clearly. I'm talking in a straight line. Do not talk in circles. When there's conflict in a marriage, in a business relationship with a client, anything like that, the more you can talk in a straight line, the better off you are going to be because you're understood, you're clear, and it's pushing the conversation forward rather than you and a client talking in circles together. You're talking in circles, they're talking in circles via email or whatever for like weeks, and it just gets worse and worse and worse.
Yeah.
So tip number 3, make sure you talk in straight lines, be assertive and be clear. Do not talk in circles.
Yeah. And then tip number 4 is how you respect yourself is how they will respect you. And this one can actually be hard for me because I feel like sometimes I'll just be like, oh, you can just have everything. And now I see the good side of that, which is what tip number 5 is going to be about. However, if you don't hold respect for yourself, your contract, what you agreed upon together, and you don't reference that, they can't see you as someone who's going above and beyond. So if, for instance, with this bride that I had, I didn't just hop on the call and go, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. My editing sucks. And I'm so sorry. Like, I don't know what I was doing. Like, let me re-edit all these for you. You're totally right. I'm wrong. Done. She would go, oh, well, I'm right. Like, yeah, do it again. Like, it would not feel like, it would feel like I'm righting a wrong rather than giving her an above and beyond experience. Instead of doing that, I came into the conversation going, hey, I understand that you feel this way about your photos. I don't want you to feel that way about the experience. However, the agreed upon contract says this, this, and this. You can refer to your contract. However, I want you to have a great experience and I want you to have this. Now, normally I don't do this. That's a great phrase if you want to use in a conflict conversation with somebody, if you're going to do something that's outside of the contract. Normally I don't do this. However, I'm happy to offer you this. And that all of a sudden reframes the entire conversation of them going, ooh, they're not going to give it to me because they're referencing the contract that I know we agreed upon. However, I'm going to do this for you. And so they're getting what they want, but it's reframed in a perspective of respect. And you're going to have way better client experiences, way more referrals, way more like feeling really taken care of than if you just kind of like roll over in submissiveness and don't respect yourself, don't respect your contract, all that kind of stuff. Now, the opposite side of that is sometimes when people go all contract, it can be really damaging to a relationship. We had a friend who requested raw images from a photographer because they really didn't love the edits
Of their wedding day.
Of their wedding day. And the photographer immediately got defensive, shot back a super angry text talking about how it's her art and how dare she even question her art and refused to give any raws. And I'm like, are you kidding me? Like, this is ridiculous. Like, how do you treat somebody like that? It's just so out of line. So you got to make sure you ride the line of respect, but also respecting your clients, right? They hired you for a service. They had a dream outcome. So make sure you respect yourself, but you also respect your clients.
Totally. That one's so important. Like, very, very, very important. I cannot stress how much that is something that I've had to really focus on doing in all of these situations over the last decade of being self-employed. It is fundamentally important to how they will treat you is how you treat yourself. So you gotta stand your ground. The fifth thing, number 5, the fifth tip for what to do when you're in conflict with a client is this. It is make the best decision for the relationship, not the situation. Now, here's what I mean by
Yes.
that. The relationship is a long-term thing. A situation is where your feet are right now. So you might be in a situation where you feel like the client is requesting something that is outside of the contract, or the client broke the contract by, giving your images to somebody that you didn't sell them to. Whatever it's going to be, that is a situation thing. The relationship thing is how they are going to view you, how they're going to work with you, how they're going to talk about you for the next 20 years of your career.
Yeah.
So when you are approaching conflict with a client, you have to have the relationship in mind. I really should be saying make the best decision for the relationship and your reputation,
Yeah.
not just the situation. So here's an example of this. With somebody from the community we already talked about, one of our grads from the Creative Rise community, who had that client that she had sold some images to, who then went and gave them to a bunch of manufacturers that make the products they sell. That is a breach of contract. She did not sell the images to them. They are not allowed to use her images. However, she came to us and said, well, what do I do? And I said, well, you have two options. Option number one is you could go yell at all the manufacturers and yell at the client you gave the images to, saying, how dare you do that? That's not how this works. You can't do that. Those are my images. They don't own those. They don't have the rights or the licensing to use those images. You all need to pay me for them. That is making a decision based off of the situation, very specifically off the situation. That is looking at the situation and going, I only care about what's happening in the situation, and I am mad about it. Therefore, I'm going to react. Versus what she ended up doing, which was great, it was brilliant. She ended up going, well, why don't I look at this as a reputation and relationship thing long term? What if I actually went to those manufacturers and say, hey, I see you're using these images, and she respected herself. I actually sold these images to this client, and technically you're not supposed to be using them. However, I really appreciate that you love them, and it shows me that we probably should be working together. Why don't we have a conversation about us doing some campaigns? You obviously love my images, and I'm honored that you're using them. Why don't we talk about next time how we could actually structure a good campaign that's specifically even made for you? You'll even get better images. So she's respecting herself by saying, I see you like them, and I'm going to take that as a win. At the same time, she's saying, I'm respecting myself because you're not supposed to be doing that, but I'm going to give you some grace here. I know you love the images, and we should work together next time. So that is making a decision for the reputation of your business and the relationship that you have with that client, rather than just making a quick decision for the situation you are in. If there's one thing that I feel like people get wrong when they first start their business, creatives are so emotional. It is this. They constantly make decisions based on the situation rather than based on what is best for their reputation and the relationship long term. So that is 1 through 5. I'm going to rip through this real quick again. How to deal when you have client conflict. This is what you do. Number 1, you find out the real problem. It's not always about what it is about. Number 2, you be timely. You don't wait. You do not take long to speak up or speak out. You get back to them promptly, okay? The longer you wait, the less weight your response holds. Number 3, you talk in straight lines. You don't talk in circles. You don't get confusing. You try and be as clear and as straightforward as possible. Number 4, you respect yourself. How you respect yourself in those conversations, in those engagements, is how they are going to also respect you. If you don't respect yourself and you walk into that conversation with your tail between your legs, they're going to stomp all over. If you come into that conversation empathetic but authoritative and holding your ground, they're going to meet you there. Okay, so you have to respect yourself. That's how they're going to actually in turn respect you. And last but not least, you got to make the decision that's best for your reputation and your relationship, not just the decision that you might feel is good in that moment for the situation. If you make decisions for the situation, it's probably the wrong decision long term. So guys, we have countless stories of this. Hope this is so helpful for you. Whether you have gone through a situation in the past and you're like, wow, I totally see how I did that wrong and I should have changed it. Or you're like, wow, I did a bunch of those things. I'm glad that I did that right. Or you were going into a situation like that, because if you haven't been through one, it's not if you are, it's when, it's not if. So you are going to go through these situations as creative business owners. If you are in the game, if you're playing the game, these things just happen. So here's the 5 things. If you want to see them again, I'll put them in the show notes. If you want to read them, we'll list all 5 in the show notes so you can go through and read them. It's great.
Yeah.
Hopefully you love this episode. If you know somebody else that could also, if you have that hot-headed friend who is a photographer, filmmaker, make sure you send this to them and say, hey, you should listen to this. I just listened to it. Make sure you share it on Instagram, screenshot this, put it up on your story, tag Creative Rise, and tag Christy and I as a little bonus if you want us to also be able to repost you on our stories. We'd love to connect with you on there. Thanks for being here.
Yeah.
We'll see you guys. See you guys next week on episode 176. We'll catch you then.